So you were a dancer before becoming a coach, and dancing has been a through line, but also it's a metaphor for you in your work, and also in your coaching work and in how you live. And so you have a great tagline, and please say it for me again. It's moving with the magnificence of life. Is that right? Flowing with the Can you say a little more about that and what that means?
Flowing with the magnificence of life. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with any of those Jamie Wheel, Stephen Kotler books on, sort of, um, and the guy whose name is this long, that's from, I think is Czech, he's Czechoslovakian, who wrote the book Flow. Um, flowing for me doesn't mean didn't mean half of what it means to me now. And recognizing that flow is kind of like our optimal performance state, and there is a real amazing cocktail of neurochemicals that are present when you're in the state of flow and of amazing focus or whatever, and it's all really positive, kind of positive juju in terms of what's coursing through your body when you're in that state. And if you're ever resisting anything, you're not in the flow, right? So there is, for me, flowing. The choice of using the word flowing is really about my practice personally, and also in the work that I do with clients, to notice what we're resisting when we're resisting, and understanding that that's given to us by our conditioning, our as as you and I have heard this phrase before, the moment you come out the chute, we have been imprinted on, right? And conditioned by our culture, our family, our, spiritual practices, our education, our economic privilege or lack thereof. And we all experience survival in our own unique, the hardware is the same, the software is what makes us supposedly, individuals, in the way in which we respond to events and whether or not we interpret ourselves to be threatened, which is a natural bias that every human being has. And so it's we're all going to get triggered. The question is, how long are we all going to be triggered for? And when we are triggered, we're not in the flow. We're protecting ourselves. We're, pleasing or appeasing, or we're fighting, and all that kind of, well-known survival tendency. And so what I've found is that when I take responsibility for my own experience, and I own the fact that I have a sort of a in some cultures call it the ego self, or the automatic mind. I am not really flowing with what's possible, because I have somehow judged something or made an assessment, that I'm being threatened, and I have to react, right, rather than responsibly an aware choice of what my next move is going to be. So that's a lot, and it's a what I'm speaking to is a whole body and a whole lifetime of practice that that anybody who steps onto the path of being more awake, at some point has to deal with the fact that we are physical, that we are bodies in motion, and we've all been built for something. I wasn't built to be a ballerina, but I had a sufficient architecture that I could express myself through contemporary dance. Yeah, it's one sort of very gross example or obvious example. So I'll pause there.
Right. So it is right. That is a lot. And well, it's very simple actually, but there's easier said than done. There's a lot to flowing, being in a flow state, and
Simple but not easy. Simple in the awareness of what it is, but not necessarily easy to still the mind long enough to see where the gift is in what could even be the most horrible things happen. We get victimized. That's kind of off the table. It's more like the mindset.
you used the word ontological earlier, and it's funny that I'm going to ask you this question because I talked with we shared a mentor and a coach, Peter, and he would all the time talk about on using the word ontological. And the whole time I thought I knew what it meant. And I read about this word all the time, and it still seems to kind of elude my grasp. And what does ontological mean?
The study of being a human being, study of beingness versus doingness or fixingness or the and quite frankly, with some of my sort of people who are in discussion with such things with me, some of whom are associated also with your current coach, um, uh, has been pushing up against my sort of preference, I would say, my very well conditioned preference for ontological inquiry versus psychological inquiry. And basically, I think this guy's point is that you can't really separate them.
What is it? I was about to associate those two and say, oh, so Jungian psychology is an ontology. What's the difference?
So, my teacher was a trained psychologist. He was introduced into the ontological frame and he saw the limits for himself in terms of when you delve into the past and you name or gather behaviors or ways of thinking or dynamics under a label, then psychology becomes a study of proving the label to be true and predictive of behavior on down the line.
Mhm.
And often it's about what's wrong rather than what's so or what's naturally occurring in a human being. So there seems, from this is my assumption in my story, there seems to often be and I would put positive psychology aside because I think that's probably the closest thing to my concept of ontology that exists. But um, yeah, so psychology is let's go back, let's go find out that, for my mother, she hated to cook. She felt she was bored. She was a frustrated feminist in the 1960s, and she was a wife, and she wanted to write, right? And she had a sister who died when she was at an early age, and she spent a lifetime trying to figure out why she was the way she was. And from my perspective, it seemed like she went down a whole lot of tunnels and there was no cheese. She never really what she got was more story. And Jungian is interesting. I think myths, our shared teacher Peter, this is all a myth. We're improvising and and playing out the myths that have conditioned us. So there's lots of really large, huge trends in all of that. The hero's journey, there's all that sort of cycle of exploration of self I think that it is predictable.
Let me say it back and see how I'm doing. So, all right, psychology is within the realm of kind of cause and effect. So I'm this way because of this, because of that, because of this. And so we trace back those billiard balls. And um, but an example you gave, ontology, is that in fact we are we come out, even to say that we're nothing, I guess, would be a story, but we come out impressionable, and events happen, experiences, we have experiences, and then those experiences condition further experiences. And so the utility of recognizing that is the case simplifies the whole equation, whereas psychology tends to be complicate things. The ontology tends to simplify. So just owning what we are is impressionable, and that we're also, when we are impressed upon, then we react, and we become kind of a series of reactions.
Rather than us being um, always at effect of our past. So there's the identification of those stories is what make me up, rather than I'm a present human being. Yes, I had those things happen. And right now, uh, my mother dying when I was in my 30s, I could not articulate how that has impacted me, nor do I think there's actually value in me trying to make up a story about how that impacted me. I am who I am now, and now I'm generating myself in the present moment in a state of becoming whatever I am 2 seconds from now.
So based on that ontology, we do have conscious choice. And tell me if I'm wrong, we don't really have conscious choice until we really own what we are.
I don't think we have conscious choice until we have an awareness that we're not being conscious. There's still going to always be the blind spots, the things that haven't come to light yet in terms of your own internal conversations, the way in which you're shaping and um, shaping your perception of how reality is occurring to you.
So reading just an excerpt from your book, if clarity and completion, it's closure with the past. And so one of the first things we have to do is have closure of the past, own what has happened, what has transpired, and own what we are before we can create a new possibility for ourselves. And which is another word, and I'm rambling a little bit here, and hopefully you can tie it together for me. But in the landmark form, they talk about creating a possibility. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? I am a possibility. Like, apparently I just didn't raise my hand, or it was an intense experience, or I just had enough, whatever. I just didn't get that answered. What do you mean I'm a possibility? That sound like, the way I interpreted it, that sounds like more like just mantra affirmation, until we can be present and aware of our own nature and our own self-conditioning and impressionability. Until we get to that point, we can't be present, and there's no possibility of being anything other than a continuation of that causal A causes B causes C.
When you're writing about your process, is that you cannot help but make it linear.
Yeah.
Like, this has to be in place before this can happen. The old if then kind of, it's faulty. It's faulty reasoning. It's faulty logic. Logic is in some ways predicated on the idea that one thing has to happen and before another thing can happen. But that's also saying that a particular outcome is necessarily the logical conclusion of how that person was and how they behaved and how they treated other people and all that. And I don't think that that's necessarily so, right? But you got to start somewhere. And I am my own building blocks for how I'm perceiving the world. I'm trapped in my own five senses. And so it's almost an impossibility for me. It's so funny. My husband and I have been on this rant about, how do we do an improv practice around taking things personally? We can't help but take things personally because of what we're, a lot of our own survival instinct is to prove to the world that we're not, as worthless as we believe we are. Right. So, and there then comes the bone deep sadness that Peter always talked about, right? We feel like we're always losing that game. Um, so the clearing or completion, I don't think is a thing to get to. It's a play, it's a and since we have both learned, there's a difference between completion and honorable closure. Completion can be that I really am free from the story that has defined me prior to this moment.
Yeah. See, if you're not right, in other words, you're still being run by your own story, your own myth, and there's no free will to use. Just at least, yeah, there's no free will in that, right? Or put it in your, there's no flowing. You're no longer flowing with the magnificence of life. You are a reaction, a mechanism.
Yeah, I'm disempowered. I'm a victim, whatever you want to call it.
You came to all of this and relate to it through dance, through the body. There's another quote I'd like to read from your book, Dancing Naked. And the quote is, "Our conditioning lives in our bodies, and we can move and act beyond our conditioning through embodied practice. The things we learn, the automatic responses, our quote, truths about how the world works, our perspective on ourselves, exist not just in our minds, but in our bodies."
Right. So Martha Graham, who was uh, a pioneer of modern dance, she said the body doesn't lie. And um, I think that's true, but I think it's incomplete. The body doesn't lie, but the mind does. And so what the mind interprets that the body is telling you is the art of interpretation.
But thinks it's experiencing.
Right. And so, what I love about mindfulness is that expanding awareness of what's so for you. What is, they call it, felt sense. What's the felt sense?